the one sort of tangent work we've done and I'd like to maybe tell you about, it relates to an effect that is one of the most remarkable effects in mammalian social chemosignaling. So, and also related to so it's not related to romanticism in any way, but it's related to reproduction. And indeed, in our lab, we've not looked at romanticism. We have looked at, or are looking at, reproduction. They're not always the same.
Certainly, but they can.
They can. Mammalian or terrestrial mammalian reproductive behavior is dominated by the sense of smell in mammals. And here, remember, initially when we started off, I noted that there are several subsystems in our nose that transduce odorants, and so primarily the main olfactory system, which is cranial nerve number 1, and the trigeminal nerve, which is cranial number 5. Most terrestrial mammals have another subsystem referred to as the secondary olfactory system that has a separate sense organ in the nose. This organ is known as the vomeronasal organ. It's a small pit in the nasal passage of most terrestrial mammals. Sometimes it's described as a communicating pit because sometimes it connects the nasal passage to the roof of the mouth. Sometimes it connects both. And so there's this sense organ with its specific receptor subtypes, VNRs, vomeronasal receptors. And this is linked to a sort of separate portion of the olfactory bulb, not really the main olfactory bulb, but it's referred to as the accessory olfactory bulb. And from there directly to the limbic system, to the portions of the brain that control reproductive behavior and aggressive behavior. And in most terrestrial mammals, this subsystem processes odorants that are sometimes referred to as pheromones, although that's in many ways a problematic term. But odorants that are referred to as pheromones, namely odorants that are emitted by another member of the species to influence that member of the species and alter behavior or hormonal state. And some of these pheromonal effects are utterly remarkable. And in my view, the most remarkable of all is an effect known as the Bruce effect. This was an effect discovered by Margaret Bruce in 1959. She was a British scientist. And in the Bruce effect, when you expose a pregnant mouse at an early critical stage of the pregnancy, I think up to about day 3, if you expose the pregnant mouse to the odor of what is referred to in technical terms as the non-stud male, that is, a male who did not father the pregnancy, she will miscarry the pregnancy. She will abort it. Now, that's an insane decision made by the female here, right? Because she's invested quite a lot in this, right? In biological terms and in forming this pregnancy and maintaining it. And yet she drops it on the basis of an odor. And this effect is remarkably robust. And what do I mean by remarkably robust? So this will occur on about 80% of exposures. Now, as you know, 80% is 100% in biology, right? I mean, there's nothing that happens at more than 80%. So it's a remarkably robust effect, this dropping of the pregnancy.
And we know it's mediated by chemosensation through the nose.
We know for sure, and we know in the following way. So first, it's enough to just bring the odor of the non-stud male. You don't have to bring the male himself, right? So you just can bring bedding from a non-stud male, and that will induce the Bruce effect. But of course, the most telling set of experiments is that if in the female mouse you ablate the vomeronasal organ, you just burn this tiny structure in the nose, then the effect disappears. So the effect is completely dependent on the vomeronasal organ. And I find this utterly a remarkable effect, right? I mean, because of the extent of cost that the female takes on here, based on this information and smell. Now, humans, the sort of the going notion in olfaction is that humans don't have a functional vomeronasal organ. So we don't have that functional organ in our nose. Now, I'll point out, we actually do have the pit. So the structure or the outlining structure is there. But the pit that we have is considered vestigial and non-functional.
And what about this thing I learned about at Berkeley in integrative biology class, that we have something called Jacobson's organ?
This is the same organ. So the Jacobson organ is the vomeronasal organ. It's also called Jacobson because I think Jacobson was a military physician in like the 1800s in Holland or something, and he found it in a soldier he was operating on or something like that. The story comes from something like that. But the Jacobson organ is another name for the vomeronasal organ. These are one and the same. The sensory organ of the accessory olfactory system. And again, the going notion is that the human Jacobson organ or vomeronasal organ is vestigial. It's non-functional.
Does that necessarily mean that we don't have these pheromone effects?
No, it does not. So first of all, we know that lots of what are considered pheromonal effects, namely social chemosignaling in rodents, are mediated by the main olfactory system. We know that for sure. There are several examples for this in mice and rats and rabbits and so on and so forth. So these can be mediated by the main olfactory system, and I'll come back to that in a second. But first, to finish the Bruce effect. And second, and I'm going out on a limb here, but I'm willing to take that risk. For me, the jury is still out on human vomeronasal organ. The decision or the notion that it's non-functional relies on about 1.5 papers post-mortem looking for the nerve that connects this thing to the brain and failing to find it, using staining and so on and so forth. But staining post-mortem studies in humans are notoriously complicated. Basically, for many reasons. One of them is that the material is just always has gone through, it's not ideally set as it is when you sacrifice an animal and study its tissue. So based on really a paucity of studies that fail to find this nerve, the notion is that the structure is vestigial in humans. I don't have any evidence that it's functional, mind you, but I'm just not sure that it's not. But what we do have a suspicion is that humans may experience something similar to a Bruce effect. So, first of all, humans have an enormous number or ratio of spontaneous miscarriage.
Are they occurring more often in the first trimester? Because you mentioned that in the Bruce effect in the mice is in the first 3 days or so following pregnancy, which in the mouse gestation, as I recall, is about 21 days in the mouse. So you're talking about 1/7 of total gestation. So I'm not quick enough to nor is it important to translate, but this would be first trimester in humans.
Which is indeed when most miscarriage occurs. Now, humans have, again, a huge number of miscarriages, and the numbers, I'll soon share them with you, they sound odd. And the reason they sound odd is because if you have what's sometimes simply referred to as failed implantation, right, this can occur in days 1, 2, nobody ever knows, okay? So some papers talk about 90% of all human pregnancies end in miscarriage. This is counting a failed implantation in day 1, 2, etc. More conservative studies talk about 50%. Nobody will argue 30%, okay? So a huge number of human pregnancies end in miscarriage. Now, out of these, there's a portion that are unexplained, right? So nobody knows why. I mean, there are a portion that are explained by all sorts of genetic factors, developmental factors, and so on and so forth. But there's also a proportion that are unexplained. And so all I'm saying is that there's a statistical backdrop or setting, if you will, for something like a remnant Bruce effect in humans. Now, with that in mind, we approached a group we enlisted a group of they're not really patients and participants in a study of people or couples who are experiencing what is referred to as unexplained repeated pregnancy loss. So formally, if you have 2 consecutive unexplained miscarriages, then that is sufficient for the diagnosis of unexplained repeated pregnancy loss. However, in our cohort of 30, we had couples who experienced 12 consecutive unexplained repeated pregnancy losses. So the two is just the formal. All of our cohort was like 12, 5, so this is an emotional, difficult place to be. And these are couples who are losing their pregnancy for no apparent reason. So they've gone through all the tests that you can imagine of genetic incompatibilities and all sorts of issues, clotting, all the known suspects for pregnancy loss, and the medical establishment remains totally at a loss as to why these pregnancies aren't holding. And so we hypothesized that perhaps here there's something akin to a Bruce type effect. Obviously, it's not going to be the same as in mice, but something like a Bruce effect. Now, of course, at that stage we could not do anything causal to test this, right? But what we could do is to see, to seek circumstantial evidence to see if where there's fire, maybe there's smoke. And what we did was we tested olfaction, and more specifically the response to male body odor in the couples experiencing repeated pregnancy loss. And we found a few things. First of all, if you think of the mechanisms behind the Bruce effect implies that the female has to have a very clear memory of the fathering male, because if she's going to miscarry in response to the non-father, she has to know father, non-father. I mean, that means that there's a pronounced olfactory memory at the moment of mating. Okay, and in mice, this has been very well characterized and attributed to the anterior olfactory nucleus, a structure in the brain. But you'd have to have this memory in order to make that decision. Now, so to address that, and here you're going to see that you in your childhood story from before stand out a bit as skillful, is that the first thing we did was just behaviorally test whether these women and control women could identify the smell of their spouse. And you might be disappointed, or we would all are probably a bit disappointed to learn that control women are very poor at this. So you would think that women would be good at identifying the body odor of their spouse. They're not. They're not far from chance. However, the women who experience repeated pregnancy loss are they're double at their performance level. So this is not a nuance effect. Women who experience repeated pregnancy loss can identify their husbands or their spouses by their body odor.
With much greater acuity than the typical person?
Double. A bit more than double, and way above chance.
Yeah, no, sorry, I posed it as a question, but I meant, yes, with much greater acuity, and double is a significant improvement. Are they much better at detecting any odor?
No, they're not. We did the controls, and they're not. And then we also measured, using fMRI, we measured their brain response to stranger male body odor. And this was quite remarkable because, we approached, so this was a full brain analysis, so without a region of interest analysis. So it's not as if you're tweaking your statistics to look at one part of the brain. You're just looking at the entire brain in the response to male body odor and asking de novo, is there a difference between these two groups of participants? And there was one huge difference, and it was in the hypothalamus. And so there was a difference in response to stranger male body odor between the two groups. So olfaction is altered in repeated spontaneous pregnancy loss. We don't know this is causal, right? But that was enough for us to approach the ethics committee to run a causal experiment. And we're at the beginning of that now.
Incredible. I can't wait to hear the results of that.
It's going to it'll probably take years, a few, because these are slow experiments to run. Recruitment is complicated, but basically we're blocking smell in couples who are trying to maintain a pregnancy.
I want to touch on some other so-called pheromone effects. And one thing I heard you say during a talk, which I think really captures this whole issue of, are there pheromone effects in humans, very nicely, as you said, whether or not it's a classic pheromone effect or whether or not it's olfaction or something else, this is chemosensory signaling between individuals. The reason this is important to me is a few years ago, I did a social media post about pheromone effects in animals and some potential pheromone effects in humans. And a couple of the human olfactionistas, more from the actually who work on animal models, really came after me with intense sniffing, saying there is no evidence for human pheromone effects, human pheromone organs. And I think today you've beautifully illustrated how, regardless of the answer to that, humans are contain and are emitting chemical signals that influence each other's physiology and behavior.
For sure. For sure. And the term pheromone is a problematic term in any case. I mean, the term was put forth to describe insect behavior, right? So, if you were given a hard time by the mouse people, you could have given them an equally hard time if you were an insect person, right? Because really the place the term is accurate is, so the first pheromone that was discovered was bambicol, which is the pheromone that has the male moth follow the scent trail of the female moth. Bambicol is a pheromone. Insect pheromone people will argue that this stuff that people talk about in mice and rats is not pheromones.
I see.
And it all becomes semantics.
Yeah,
right?
Sort of like nerdy inside ball. Yeah.
It's all semantics. Yeah. So in our publications, we don't use the term pheromone, because it would not help me and it would probably only hurt us. And so, we talk about chemosignals, and humans definitely emit chemosignals from their body. And these chemosignals influence other humans and influence their behavior. There are several examples of this. One of them I'll point out first, which is sort of the most widely studied and not mostly from our lab, actually. I mean, the flavor of the month for the past 10 years in this field is what's referred to as the smell of fear, right? So this is probably true of many mammals and humans. It's true of, we emit a specific body odor when we're in a state of fear. This was first discovered in humans by Denise Chen out of, I think, Brown. I'm not sure.
I think that's right. Yep.
Humans emit a particular body odor when they're in a state of fear, and this body odor influences other humans, in effect, increasing their autonomic arousal, their sympathetic state. So in effect, you could say that fear is contagious a bit. So the smell of fear is contagious. By the way, culturally, we know for ages that dogs can smell fear in humans, but actually that was only really shown about a year and a half ago in a study. So it was always said, but it wasn't really shown effectively. It was shown about a year and a half ago in a study that dogs indeed can smell human fear. And humans can smell human fear. So several labs, starting from Denise Chen and Haviland Jones, and then in our lab and in other labs, if you collect body odor from people in a state of fear and collect body odor from the same people when they're not in a state of fear, other people can determine which is the state of fear or not, and this influences their behavior.
What about the smell of safety, or is that simply the absence of the odor corresponding to fear? And the reason I ask this is somewhat woven into our prior discussion about mate choice. Again, I'll ask the question in a form of brief anecdotes. I'll use the "I had a friend who" approach here. But one phenomenon that has nothing to do with me in particular, I think this is a common phenomenon, is romantic partners leaving articles of clothing at each other's homes. Now, this could have other purposes to mark territory, but visually marking territory, but also scent marking territory is very common in the animal kingdom. Yeah. It's not uncommon for romantic partners when one is traveling or a way for the other partner to smell their article of clothing in order to bring about positive connotations of the other partner. Very common behavior. If you're doing this, folks, other people are doing this too.
Yeah.
It raises questions, for instance, about whether or not the mourning period post-breakup, whether by decision, by death, or by some other phenomenon that's forced the breakup, whether or not that mourning period has something to do with an olfactory unlearning of and mate selection, and on and on and on.
With all these insights, I would offer you to be a postdoc in my lab.
I was going to say, listen, I have a sabbatical coming up, so I would love to do a sabbatical.
But it's going to kill me.
So exactly. You don't want me to work for you. We talked about this earlier.
That's what I'm saying.
For other reasons, exactly. There's a story there. What Noam is referring to, I'll just tell people because inside jokes on a podcast don't really work. Earlier, I was referring to the fact that I've had 3 incredible scientific mentors, undergraduate, graduate, and postdoc, but for reasons that are unclear to me. The first one died of suicide, the second one cancer at 50, and the third one pancreatic cancer in his early 60s. And the last one before he died, who was an MD and a common friend of Noam's and I, turned to me and said, Andrew, you're the common denominator. So, the joke in my business is you don't want me to work for you. So nonetheless, I would love to do a sabbatical in your lab.
No, so what I was trying to say in that roundabout way is that those are all really keen observations and good ideas, for sure. And they just highlight again, that we're incredibly olfactory animals. And you're even talking about the nuance. We're very olfactory, even not in the nuance. I mean, I have this. When people tell me that, that we don't use our sense of smell and we don't need it and all that, and I have to deal with this a lot, right? I have to deal a lot. You study vision. Nobody will tell you that vision is unimportant, right?
Yeah, we're very visually dependent. I don't need a dog to take over my olfactory system if I lose olfaction, but I'll tell you from having lost my sense of smell for one day,
right.
I was in intense fear. I bit into I love blueberries. I'm like a drive-by blueberry eater. If they're there, I just kind of pick them up like a grizzly bear and cram them in my mouth. So keep them away from me if you don't want them eaten. But I almost can't help myself. I bit into a blueberry or a handful of blueberries, and it was the sensation of little bags of water, and I immediately felt like tremendous grief.
I'll tell you a sort of a throwaway line that I use in this when I talk with people. Take the 2 most basic behaviors that sustain us, right? Let's say I give you a choice between a beautiful looking layer cake with strawberries and blueberries and whipped cream, but that smells of sewage, versus some gray brown mix that smells of cinnamon. Which do you eat?
Oh, simple. The latter.
Right. You eat the latter, right? Now imagine I offer you a mate. Choose the gender of your liking, right? That looks like a Greek god or goddess, right? But smells of sewage. Or an ordinary looking individual that smells of sin itself. Who do you choose?
The latter.
Right. So in the 2 most basic behaviors we have, we follow our nose, not our eyes. Right.
Definitely not always in predictable ways, because you offered an extreme example, which is the best example. But I, for instance, for reasons I don't know, I've never liked the smell of perfume, ever. In fact, I find it aversive. But I confess, I do like the smell of certain body odors very much. And I'm very particular about that. And I know within an instant. And so this is a problem for any romantic partner who likes perfume for me, but I know many people like perfumes and colognes and things of that sort.
Perfume.
And in fairness, I've also been told that by someone that they couldn't spend time with me because they do not like my smell. In fact, they dislike it. And fortunately for me, there's at least one person on the planet who said the opposite. So I completely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
I can also say that I imprinted on the smell of I had a bulldog mastiff when I raised from the time he was a puppy, and I imprinted on his smell immediately. And even though to other people it was a bulldog mastiff, after all, his smell was rather aversive. To me, he smelled delicious. Right. And it made me, it smelled like home, and he was my best animal friend for a long time. So, and on and on and on. Right. The smell of children, as you said, the backs. We had a guest on this podcast who I'm sure you're familiar with, Charles Zucker, a professor at Columbia, has done incredible work in vision and olfaction and thirst sensing. And I talked a little bit about this, that there's something in the breath of romantic partners that's hopefully appetitive, not aversive, as well as in children. He was talking about the smell of his grandchild's, the nape of the back of their neck, and how he misses that smell because when he thinks about missing his grandchild or children, it's that smell that's associated with that feeling.
So, hexadecanal.
Hexadecanal?
Yes.
Is it, Charles Zucker, your grandchildren smell like hexadecanal.
Yes,
he's going to come after me now.
They do. And so this is a study ran by Eva Mishor, who was a graduate student in our lab. And Eva was interested in aggression. She was really